this isn't pizza. At least, that's what New Yorkers say. But for Chicagoans, this thick, saucy, cheese-loaded masterpiece isn't just pizza. It's a symbol of their city's identity. So why is deep dish called Chicago style? And how did a dish that breaks every traditional pizza rule become one of America's most iconic foods? The answer takes us back to a cold December night in 1943, to a small restaurant in Chicago where two men were about to create one of the most controversial foods in America accidentally. It's 1943. America is deep in World War II, and Chicago is booming as an industrial powerhouse. The city's meatpacking plants, steel mills, and factories are running overtime. Workers are pulling long shifts, and they need food that can sustain them, something hearty, filling, substantial. The thin crust pizza that Italian immigrants had brought to Chicago in the early 1900s was fine, but it felt more like an appetizer than a meal. Chicago in the 1940s was a city of immigrants and working-class families. The South Side was home to the largest African-American community in the Midwest, drawn by factory jobs during the Great Migration. The Near West Side housed Italian families who had been making thin crust pizza in their neighborhoods for decades. But the city's identity was still forming, still searching for something uniquely its own. Enter Ike Sewell and Rick Ricardo. Sewell was a University of Texas football player turned businessman with big ideas. Ricardo was an Italian-American restaurateur who knew the food business. They wanted to open a restaurant together, and they had a crazy idea. What if they could make pizza into a complete dinner? Sewell later said he wanted to create a pizza you'd have to eat with a knife and fork. In 1943, that sounded ridiculous. Pizza was finger food. Pizza was thin. Pizza had the sauce on top. But Sewell and Ricardo weren't interested in following the rules. On December 12, 1943, they opened Pizzeria Uno at 29 East Ohio Street in Chicago's River North neighborhood. What they served that night changed American food forever, though nobody knew it at the time. The technical innovation was remarkable. Instead of rolling the dough thin, they pressed it thick and pushed it up the sides of a deep, round pan, like a pie crust. The dough itself was different too, richer, more buttery, designed to hold substantial weight. Instead of putting sauce on top, they laid cheese directly on the crust. Then they added their toppings. And then, this was the revolutionary part, they finished it with chunky tomato sauce on top. The sauce had to be chunky because thin sauce would have made the whole thing soggy during the long baking process. The whole thing took 35 to 45 minutes to bake, which meant restaurants had to completely rethink their timing and operations. This wasn't fast food. This was slow food before slow food was a movement. The result was unlike anything anyone had seen. It was pizza technically, but it looked more like a savory pie. One slice was a complete meal. You absolutely needed a knife and fork, and it was delicious. But here's the thing, it wasn't an instant hit. The thick pizza developed a cult following in its neighborhood, but it took time to catch on citywide. Chicagoans were skeptical at first. This wasn't the pizza their Italian neighbors made. This was something entirely new, entirely American. But gradually, people began to understand what Sewell and Ricardo had created. Chicago winters are brutal, and sitting down to a pizza that took 45 minutes to bake meant settling in somewhere warm for over an hour. The deep dish became perfect for the city's climate and culture. It was comfort food for a working-class city that valued substance over style. The economics worked too. While thin crust pizza was cheap and quick, deep dish commanded higher prices and kept customers in restaurants longer. For restaurant owners, it was a business model that made sense in a city where people weren't always rushing. By the 1950s, other Chicago pizzerias began experimenting with their own versions. This is where the story gets really interesting, because each restaurant developed its own fiercely loyal following. Lou Malnati had worked as a pizza maker at Pizzeria Uno in the early days. In 1971, he opened his own place and perfected what many consider the ultimate deep dish crust recipe. Flaky, buttery, and sturdy enough to hold all that cheese and sauce. Lou Malnati's became legendary for its crust, with second- and third-generation customers swearing by the family recipe. Then in 1974, the Giordano brothers took the concept even further. They created stuffed pizza, essentially deep dish with another layer of crust on top, creating a pizza sandwich. It was even more outrageous than the original, requiring nearly an hour to bake and yielding slices that weighed nearly a pound each. Each pizzeria developed not just customers, but passionate advocates. Chicagoans didn't just prefer Lou's or Giordano's or Uno's, they would argue about it. They would defend their choice. They would bring visitors to prove their point. Families developed traditions around their chosen pizzeria. Kids grew up going to the same place their parents did. Wedding parties would debate which restaurant to visit. Business deals were sealed over deep dish dinners that lasted 2 hours. This is crucial to understanding how deep dish became Chicago style. Unlike New York pizza, which spread everywhere and became generalized, deep dish remained concentrated in Chicago and its suburbs. It became uniquely associated with the city because it never left the city in any meaningful way. In the 1960s and 70s, something interesting happened. As tourism to Chicago increased, trying deep dish became a must-do activity. Food writers started calling it Chicago style to distinguish it from other pizzas. The name stuck because the identity was already there. Travel guides in the 1970s began listing deep dish restaurants as tourist attractions, right alongside the Art Institute and Wrigley Field. Food Network shows in the 1990s featured deep dish as a regional specialty. The Food Channel's Best Pizza in America episodes always included a Chicago segment. By the 1980s, deep dish had become Chicago's signature food export, generating millions in tourism revenue. Every guidebook mentioned it. Every visitor had to try it. Hotels began recommending deep dish restaurants to guests. Tour companies created pizza tours of the city. The big three, Pizzeria Uno, Lou Malnati's, and Giordano's, became pilgrimage sites for food tourists, with lines stretching around blocks during peak tourist seasons. But success bred controversy. New Yorkers, intensely proud of their thin-crust pizza, began pushing back. They started saying deep dish wasn't real pizza. The rivalry intensified over the decades, reaching peak absurdity in the social media age. Food Network began featuring pizza battles between cities. Travel Channel did episodes on regional pizza styles. The internet exploded with pizza debates that could get surprisingly heated. Chicago food forums were filled with passionate defenses of deep dish. New York food blogs dismissed it as casserole or pie. In 2013, comedian Jon Stewart famously called Chicago deep dish a casserole on The Daily Show, saying it was an above-ground marinara swimming pool for rats. Chicagoans were not amused. The mayor's office actually issued a response, sending Stewart a care package of deep dish pizza. Local news stations covered the pizza controversy like it was international diplomacy. This wasn't just about food anymore. This was about civic pride, regional identity, and what it means to be authentically American. The pizza wars revealed something important about American food culture. Different cities don't just have different foods. They have different food identities. New York pizza is about speed, efficiency, grab-and-go urban life. Chicago deep dish is about taking time, sitting down, making a meal an event. Chicago food blogger David Hammond puts it this way: Chicagoans don't care what anyone else thinks. This is our pizza, our way. If you don't like it, that's your problem. This attitude is quintessentially Chicago. It's a working-class city that doesn't apologize for who it is. The pizza is unapologetically heavy, filling, and different. In our fast food world, it's a deliberate choice to slow down. Today, deep dish continues to evolve while honoring its roots. Modern Chicago pizzerias offer gluten-free crusts, gourmet toppings, and vegan versions. Some restaurants experiment with different cheese blends or sauce recipes. But the core identity remains unchanged. It's Chicago's pizza. Pequod's Pizza developed a signature caramelized crust. Art of Pizza created variations with different dough recipes. New restaurants like Spacca Napoli offer both Neapolitan thin crust and deep dish, showing how Chicago has room for all pizza styles while maintaining its deep dish pride. Walk into any Chicago neighborhood pizzeria, and you'll see families sharing deep dish pies, taking their time, talking, laughing. You'll see tourists taking Instagram photos of their first slice, You'll see locals who've been coming to the same place for decades, ordering the same thing, because this pizza isn't just food, it's part of their identity. Chicago food historian Bruce Craig explains it this way. Deep dish represents something essential about Chicago. It's a city that does things its own way, that doesn't follow trends, that values substance over style. The pizza embodies those values. Ask any Chicagoan about deep dish, and you'll get passion, not just preference. They'll tell you which place has the best crust, the best sauce, the perfect cheese-to-topping ratio. They'll argue about cooking techniques and family recipes. They'll defend their city's creation against all critics. Whether they prefer Lou's buttery crust or Giordano's stuffed version, or Pequod's caramelized edges, they're united in defending Chicago's culinary innovation. It's become part of their civic DNA, passed down through generations like family recipes. So why is deep dish called Chicago style? Because in 1943, two restaurateurs in Chicago created something completely new. Not just a different kind of pizza, but a different approach to what pizza could be. Over 8 decades, that creation became inseparable from the city's identity. Deep dish is Chicago style because it became uniquely, unmistakably Chicago. Born from the city's working-class pragmatism, perfected by local artisans, and defended by generations of proud Chicagoans, it's more than food, it's cultural DNA. In a country built on immigrant foods adapting to American tastes, deep dish represents something rare, a completely American original that became the soul of a city. It's not Italian pizza adapted for American palates. It's not a variation on an existing theme. It's something entirely new that could only have happened in Chicago in 1943, when two men decided to break all the rules. Today, when someone says Chicago-style pizza, everyone knows exactly what they mean. Not thin crust with Italian sausage, not tavern style, not any of the other pizzas you can find in Chicago. They mean deep dish, thick, saucy, cheesy, controversial, and unapologetically Chicago. That's the power of food becoming identity. That's why a pizza invented on a cold night in 1943 is still sparking passionate debates in 2025. That's why deep dish isn't just called Chicago style, it is Chicago style.